Hey, welcome everybody. This is another mini-sode. My name's Dustin Harris. Welcome. A couple of weeks ago, I did a mini-sode and we talked about who can or should be able to make a complaint to the state. I want to follow up with that today because I received some information. Shout out to Robert Bodkin, a friend of mine, a colleague of mine. And he sent me an email that I think was super interesting, very timely on this matter. This goes more to, can an appraiser be sued by a borrower? So hang on for that. I want to remind you that we are sponsored by ANOW Software. ANOW, of course, is the software that I use to manage my entire appraisal office. You can find them at anow.com/coach. One more time, it's anow.com/coach. Robert reached out to me. Thank you, Robert, for sending this to me. I think this is super timely and super important. So again, a couple of weeks ago, we did a show on who should be able to complain. I was a little miffed, honestly, because I had been turned into the state by a borrower who frankly had no other basis to turn me in other than they didn't like their value. They thought that their house was a castle, and thus they turned me in, and I went through this big rigmarole. And, at the end, of course, this was hypothetical. This didn't really happen. We cleared that up with Tim Anderson. But if it had happened, it upset me because the bottom line is everybody thinks their house is worth more than it really is. And the question that I put out on that episode is, should a borrower be able to make that kind of a complaint? And I think we established that, sure, a borrower should be able to make a complaint if they see an issue. The question is whether or not the state should take those complaints seriously. And that's really the issue that we dealt with on that particular program. Today, I want to do a follow-up to that because the question is, should a borrower or an investor have the opportunity, the option, if you will, to sue an appraiser? So that's the question on the table, and I'm not going to be able to answer. I'll just tell you up front, I'm not going to be able to answer the question entirely. But what was sent to me from Rob, and Rob, by the way, is located in Washington State, and that's relevant to this discussion today because what he sent me was actually an email from Peter Christensen. Peter and I are friends. At least I consider him a friend. Don't ask him what he thinks of me. I'm just kidding. I think we're friends. We're definitely acquaintances and on good speaking terms. I respect Peter. He's a very smart person. I've had lengthy conversations with him on a variety of different topics, and I do trust the things that he says. And I think what happened was Peter had reached out to basically anybody in the state of Washington who would listen to him concerning a Supreme Court decision that was recent. In fact, it was January 4th, 2017. So that's how recent the Supreme Court decision. Now, when I say Supreme Court, I want to make it very clear. We are talking about Washington State Supreme Court, not the federal government here, not SCOTUS. Okay, we're talking about Washington State. That's it. All right. Now, this only applies to Washington State. However, you and I both understand that whenever a state, and especially a Supreme Court in a state, makes a decision, it does set a precedence that can be cited in other cases. And typically what happens is those cases are cited enough that we start to establish case law throughout the country. Now, I'm talking like I know something, right? I need to back up for just a second and just very humbly tell you that I am not a lawyer and I have no clue what I'm talking about, right? So I realize that as I'm sitting there using all these highfalutin terms like case law, that some of you might think that I know something about what I'm talking about, which I do not. Let me make it very clear. I do not know what I'm talking about, right? I'm just telling you as I see it, what happens. And what I see is once a court case is established, it does provide a precedence that can be quoted and can be cited in other cases. And what you see, at least the way I understand it, what you see is when these things happen, they sometimes roll out across the country. And I think it's important that we take a look at this particular ruling because it very much applies to appraisers and what can or cannot be our fate in the future. Okay? So let me just read to you from the email that Peter sent to Rob, who sent to me. Okay, if that's not convoluted enough, okay? He says, on January 4th, 2017, the Washington Supreme Court denied review of a very good Court of Appeals decision for appraisers. Okay, let me restate that. In other words, the Court of Appeals made a decision in front of in favor of appraisers, and the Supreme Court denied a review of it. In other words, the Supreme Court basically looked at the case and said, no, what the Court of Appeals had decided is good. We let it stand. We're not even going to review it. We think it's good. So what did the Court of Appeals decide? Again, quoting from the email, the case is Rock Group versus Value Logic, which I've spoken about during various conferences, Peter says, just as an aside. The Supreme Court's denial of review means that the lower court of appeals opinion stands unchanged and thus will help appraisers in defense of future cases. This is a published decision, meaning that it is citable in other cases. So what is the decision, folks? Well, you're going to have to hold on for just a few minutes because I want to talk to you first about ANow software. Folks, I've been using ANow software for going on 2 years now, and I love it. In fact, I just got back from a couple mastermind meetings, one in D.C. and one in Chicago. And as we're talking, there's about half the people in that room that are using ANow software and half the people that are not. And I'm telling you, those that are using it are looking at those across the table that are not and saying, what is your deal, dude? Get on board. Why? Because ANow software makes it easier to run a business, and that's what this is all about. Allowing technology and allowing the ability to work smarter rather than harder, work for you as a small business owner is essential. ANow software will do that for you. Right now, folks, if you join ANow software, you can receive 3 months free of the All-Star team. That's right. 3 months free. If you're not already a member of the All-Star team, jump on ANow, check them out. By the way, ANow always has really, really good deals, and we were just actually in the mastermind meeting in Chicago. Somebody pulled up ANow software on their phone because somebody was like, well, I don't know. What's the cost again? Somebody pulled it up, and they're like, holy smokes, it's cheap right now. Now, by the time this airs, I have no idea. They have monthly deals, so I'm not even going to throw out what the deal was, but I'm telling you, when I saw it, I was like, wow, that's pretty inexpensive for what you get. So check them out. They'll have different deals, different times. You're going to want to find out more by going to anow.com/coach. One more time, anow.com/coach. And welcome back, folks. We are talking about a decision in the Supreme Court of the state of Washington. Again, not the U.S. Supreme Court, but the state of Washington has set somewhat of a precedence in the fact that a court of appeals had made a decision in favor of appraisers, and the Supreme Court basically said, we're not even going to review it. We're going to deny the motion to review because we basically think that the Court of Appeals made the right decision here. So what is that decision? What are we talking about? Again, this is an email that was sent to me from Rob Bodkin, a friend of mine, an associate of mine, a great appraiser up in the state of Washington. And it was basically an email that he received from Peter Christensen, who I highly respect, great guy, very, very much knows his stuff. He's located in California, and he knows USPAP, and he knows appraiser law because that's what he deals with on a regular basis as an attorney. And so reading from that email, continuing, he said, the Court of Appeals decision reinforces the importance for appraisers in seeking to define narrowly those parties who can use or rely upon their reports. Okay, that's his key here, folks. In other words, your intended users. And in defining precisely the uses for which reports are provided. He says, I do realize the challenge of this in the face of lending demands. The appraisers in the case were sued by investors who had invested in the purchase of commercial property at the top of the market and who later claimed that in making their investment decisions, they relied on the appraiser's reports prepared for the bank in connection with the loan. Okay, again, let me just clarify what we're talking about here. The individuals who sued had purchased commercial property, and their reason for suing the appraiser, they're suing the appraiser here, okay? And the reason for suing the appraiser is that they said that they relied on that document, the appraisal, as part of the reason for getting the loan. Peter continues, the reports very clearly stated that they could only be used by the bank for the bank's consideration of the loan. Okay, again, the reports very clearly stated that they could only be used by the bank for the bank's consideration of the loan. Folks, this is why we define intended user on our reports. And all of us are doing that, right? Right? Okay. The trial court used the language to find that the appraisers owed no legal duty to the investors. Let me repeat that. The court used the language to find that the appraisers owed no legal duty to the investors and thus dismissed the lawsuit. The Court of Appeals agreed with that dismissal. This is exactly the way that we should hope the intended user and user language in the reports will be applied. Okay, folks, this is good news for appraisers. When you define your intended user, it should be that user. And for someone else to step in, even a borrower, yes, even a borrower. And how many times have we been sitting in borrowers' homes? Now, this was a commercial case, I understand, but I think the precedence is the same for residential, right? Well, there's no difference here. I don't think the type of real estate made any difference here. It was the situation that basically someone comes in, a borrower, for example, and wants to get money to purchase a property or refinance a property, what have you, and they rely heavily on the appraisal for that decision, and then later on think that they got ripped off, and they come back against the appraiser and sue the appraiser and basically say, hey, here's the deal. I relied on that report. I relied on that appraiser, and I got screwed, and thus I'm going to screw the appraiser in turn. And what the Washington State Supreme Court said is, no, you can't do that. You were not an intended user. It was the bank who was the intended user. Therefore, if the bank wants to sue the appraiser, that's one thing. But the borrower, the investor, no way. Folks, this is good news for appraisers. I hope it continues to roll out. It lessens our liability. It lessens our exposure. And I think it should, because keep in mind why we're doing those appraisals. I think that sometimes appraisers get a little bit the wrong side of things when we see that these reports are being passed from user to user to user, and I shouldn't say even user, person to person to person to entity to what have you, and to think that exposure for that appraiser should be upheld is just baloney. We did that for a specific purpose, and we did that for a very specific user, and that should be the extent of it. That's my opinion. That's Peter's opinion. And now that's the Washington State Supreme Court's decision as well. And hopefully this will roll out across the country. Folks, love your feedback on this and any other episode. Please go to my website, theappraisercoach.com, and click on podcast and tell me what you think. Folks, I just mentioned that we had just returned from 2 dream teams, getting a little bit of a mix-up in our dream teams now. I've got a couple people who are moving from Chicago to my new Dallas dream team. Got a couple people that may be moving from DC to Chicago. So as a consequence, we've got a couple seats open in, I think at least one seat open in every single dream team. Right now, we have to have no more than 8 people in each dream team. So once that cap is met, that cap is met. If you're interested in being a part of the dream team, being a part of a group that meets quarterly, every quarter, for a full day to work on your appraisal business and help you to be a better business owner. DC, Chicago, Dallas, 2 in Las Vegas, and 1 in Chicago. Please reach out to me, the coach at theappraisercoach.com, and catch you next time.